A very warm welcome. I welcome you all to St. Cuthbert's Church. We gather today to celebrate and give thanks for the life of Janet Vivian Hornsey, to comfort one another, share treasured memories, and give thanks for all that Janet gave to us during her life. And it's wonderful to have the choir singing with us today as tribute to Janet, with music chosen that Janet loved. Would you please stand, if you're able, as we join in singing our first hymn, Hills of the North, Rejoice. The words are in your service booklets. Would you please like to be seated? And would cousin Kevin like to come up to the eagle microphone and share a tribute on behalf of the family? Thank you.
Janet Vivian Hornsey, JJ, Janetta, JV, Porky, Jan, Mrs. Simpson Hornsey, or just Mrs. Hornsey. Whatever name you knew her as, whether as a friend, a neighbour, a work colleague, a student, or even a family member, I'm sure you will all have fantastic memories of the wonderful character that was Janet. She was an individual, a one of a kind that loved life and loved interacting with people, young and old. She enjoyed a good chat, was quite partial to a piece of cake, and lived in a part of the country that she loved. She created, along with Peter's help, a wonderful family in her own very special, colourful way. One thing you may not know is that Janet was named after a very famous scientist. It was a name that Janet really didn't care for. Hence the reason she would often call herself different names. I know Janet wouldn't mind me saying she wasn't your normal individual. I'm sure anyone that had the pleasure of being taught by her would say she was not like most other teachers. Her passion for anything she put her efforts into was infectious. There was never a dull moment when Janet was around. If you wanted to do something, she would always encourage it. If you wanted to talk and discuss things, she was your go-to person. Not afraid to give her opinion, but always willing to listen and discuss your thoughts, whether that be day or night. Her home was always so very welcoming, with a hot drink and some lovely homemade cake to enjoy. Having known Janet for all my life, and with the help of Amanda, I was asked to try and give an insight into the early years of Janet Vivian and what made her into the individual we all came to love. Janet was the first child of Valerie and Peter Simpson. I would like to start by reading a little note I received from Rosemary Williams, known as Auntie Raspberry, as she recalls the arrival of Janet, and I quote, "On the 29th and the 30th of December, a blizzard swept across southern England and Wales, with snow drifting to more than 20 feet deep in places, and bringing with it freezing temperatures. This meant that the snow hung around for 2 months. To this day, January 1963 remains the coldest month for central England since 1814. When Valerie and I bumped into each other in town one day, she said, 'Guess what? I'm pregnant.' And I replied, 'Guess what? So am I.' We went to prenatal classes together, watched a film on a woman giving birth, looked at each other in horror and said, 'Too late now to change our minds.' Marianne was due a few days later than she actually arrived on the 30th of December. Janet arrived a few days earlier than expected. So when Valerie said to Peter, 'The contractions have started, the baby is coming,' Peter replied, 'Just because Rosemary's baby has arrived, you're just imagining things. Ours is not due yet.' And then Valerie's waters broke. Back in those days, it was quite a new idea to give birth at home, which Rosemary had done, but Valerie had chosen the hospital. But because of the frozen snow, the ambulance was unable to reach the family home. So Valerie had to walk down a steep, frozen hill during the night to get to the hospital, with Peter trying to keep them both upright, which he did. So Janet Vivian Simpson arrived in this world on the 31st of December 1962 in Amersham Hospital. Because of the snow hanging around for 2 months, both Rosemary and Valerie were unable to take their babies out of their prams until March. And because in those days there was no such things as disposable nappies or tumble dryers, the washed nappies just froze solid on the washing line. Challenging times. Janet was the first child of Peter and Valerie Simpson. They had met when they both lived in Preston Road in Wembley. They were both keen on sport, especially tennis. Having got married and moved to a small flat in Chesham in Buckinghamshire, they had a little mini estate car, which I am told was a bit of a tight squeeze for Peter to get into. Valerie had studied and gained a degree in microbiology at Reading University. And Peter worked for Marston Lines, an American shipping company in Pall Mall in London, with his father Sydney. Whilst working there, he was offered a job transfer to Canada. But Valerie didn't want to leave the family and the United Kingdom. 16 days after the birth of Janet, I arrived into this world. I am the youngest of 3 boys from Valerie's older sister, Lucille, making me Janet's cousin. or, as Janet always introduced me, her younger cousin. Something that I would always go on to point out was only by 16 days. However, to Janet, these 16 days were always very important, especially growing up, because they meant she always had the final decision on what we were going to do or to play. Janet was joined nearly 3 years later by her sister Amanda, affectionately known as Moose. The family moved from their flat in Chesham to Chandler's Ford, as Peter had found a new job working for Cunard. And then a few years later, they moved again, this time to Maidenhead, when Peter started his new job at Heathrow Airport, working as a civil servant responsible for looking after any VIPs entering or leaving the country. Peter, or Uncle Peter as I would call him, was a tall gentleman with a fantastic presence about him. He was a gentleman that enjoyed the finer things in life, whether that be a nice glass of wine, or scotch, or port. In fact, if you could name a drink, Uncle Peter would probably have a bottle of it for you to try. He also enjoyed a puff on a pipe, a cigar, and a cigarette. He was a very good pianist, a good cricket player, and a fantastic host. Two other memorable attributes about Uncle Peter was he was always late to arrive anywhere, and he loved a bit of personal shopping. Auntie Valerie was the perfect partner for Peter. She was a fantastic cook who enjoyed nothing more than a good game of table tennis while spending time with the family. Like Peter, she too was musical. She could play the piano well. Being a scientist, she tended to be very organised. The food she prepared was always exactly to the correct amounts of ingredients, the oven set to exactly the correct temperature, and then cooked exactly to the time stated on the recipe. Not a bit like our Janet. She liked to get things moving, so Peter was always being hurried along. And as for being organised, everything had its own place, even to the point that if you went to the loft to find something, at the top of the ladder, by the light switch, you would find a hand-drawn floor plan with numbers that corresponded to spaces and boxes in them. Christmas decorations were always in position 4 and 5. Both were very family-minded and fantastic parents. Luckily for all of us, we had a wonderful grandmother called Rosie. She was a fantastic seamstress, and it was not uncommon for her to create new outfits for her 2 granddaughters. These could be anything from blouses, skirts, dresses, and even hot pants. So Janet and Amanda would often look like 2 peas in a pod. The only issue when wearing them for the first time was the chance that there would still be a pin left in the hem that would give you a sharp prick when you least expected it. The Simpsons and my family, the Stokeses, got on famously. We lived some 45 minutes away from each other. However, this didn't stop us from meeting up regularly. Whenever we met up, Janet, Moose, and myself got along famously, like brother and sister, never arguing. Janet made sure of that, because she was the eldest, remember. Every summer we spent holiday together in Foy in Cornwall. It was one of those holidays that gives me the first real memory of Janet and Moose. It is fair to say that neither of them were particularly good travellers in cars. In fact, they suffered a lot with car sickness. The annual summer holiday would start at 5 a.m. in the morning and make an 8-hour journey down to the West Country, something now that can be done in under 4 hours. It was always agreed that the 2 families would meet up near Stonehenge for breakfast. Needless to say, the Stokes family would always arrive first. No mobile phones in those days to keep in touch, so when the Simpsons did finally arrive, a fraught Auntie Valerie would jump out of the car, explain that Peter had been his usual slow self getting moving, and that they'd had to stop numerous times for the girl's sickness. She would then have a discussion with my mother, and yes, you probably guessed it, it was my job to jump out of our sweet-smelling car and into Uncle Peter's car, which by now had all the windows wide open because fresh air was the best cure for sickness, according to Auntie Valerie. I then had to try and entertain my two cousins to stop them from being ill. This was something I became pretty proficient at over the years, and yes, you could play I Spy for 5 hours non-stop in those days because most of the journey was on small twisting roads going in and out of villages with lots to look at. It was my job to do anything to take my cousins' mind off their poorly tummies. Unbeknown to the girls, if I succeeded, Uncle Peter would give me 20p. This was so I could go to the chocolate vending machine just down the road from where we used to stay. Needless to say, once the girls' tummies had settled down, Janet was very good at extracting more 20p pieces from Uncle Peter. But we weren't to tell Auntie Valerie. In fact, we used to get a bar of chocolate each morning if we collected the papers, so there was never short of chocolate. Growing up with Janet's unprecedented desire for all things sweet was repressed by Auntie Valerie's strict sweets on Sunday rule. Janet made up for this cruel lack of sweeties later in her life when she would refer to herself as a 3 bars a girl day, usually Cadbury's bars. Marie, one of her school friends, clearly remembers the day coming home from school when they jointly demolished a whole pack of marzipan. Janet's first school was Ellington Primary School in Maidenhead, Berkshire. Its headmaster was a Mr. Hurst, and he introduced the open classroom approach. This was where Janet and the rest of the school floated around in large classrooms, learning at their own pace, in a rather nebulous way, all rather confusing and extremely unpopular with the parents. This was probably where Janet established her lifelong saying, "I can, I like to." From here, Janet moved to Newland School, Secondary School in Maidenhead. Janet was quite sporty at school, playing for the school team and at county level in netball. She also excelled at high jump and shot put. There was no doubt from a young age, Janet was just a naturally intelligent person who had the ability to hit the grades. However, she tended to breeze along at her own pace. She tended to enjoy the more creative subjects, like art and French. She always hated science and maths. Having a mum being a scientist probably had something to do with that one. As you can imagine, being the same age as Janet, my academic results were often compared to hers. Keep me quiet over there. I can remember the first time we spoke about taking GCSEs/CSEs. Needless to say, Janet didn't take any CSEs. Janet got all her GCSEs, whereas my results were nowhere near on the same level. One subject we had both taken was geography. I felt it was one of my stronger subjects, a subject I might just be able to get close to Janet on. Oh, how wrong was I. Janet got an excellent result, and I scraped a pass. As you can imagine, I was disappointed. I had revised tirelessly on all parts of the subject. However, on discussion with Janet, it turned out we had taken exactly the same exam from the same examination board. Janet explained that she had revised for 45 minutes before the exam and couldn't believe her luck. As she put it, that the bulk of the questions were on the 3 parts of the curriculum that she had read up on. It would seem Janet could just pass exams. Interestingly, Amanda sent a little story from one of Janet's school friends, which I'd like to read out. It all began in 1970, when we were doing our A-levels together at Newland School in Maidenhead, and we decided, for good measure, to take an extra O-level. Don't ask me why. I really couldn't tell you. But Janet and I and 2 others signed up to take Spanish classes, perhaps thinking it would be an easy option. Our hapless teacher turned out to be a very young Frenchwoman called Mrs. Duchesne, who made the grave error of thinking we were adults, worse, of treating us like adults, and of believing we were there to actually learn. Not a bit of it, of course, because we soon devised a plan to take it in turns to miss a lesson and to opt out in strict rotation, such that Mrs. Duchesne never did have more than 3 reluctant pupils in her class. Did she ever twig what we were doing? We wondered. We never did find out. Of course, predictably, when the exams came around, I barely scraped a pass. And it should come as no surprise to anyone here, Janet rommed home with a classy winning style. Although Janet's results were always of the above average score, Amanda recalls when Janet came home from school with her results, they were usually okay, but not as good as they might have been, much to Mum's frustration. And Janet would simply say, "But I did better than Hazel Showell." To put this into context, Hazel was not the sharpest pencil in the box, and getting a higher grade than Hazel was not really worth shouting about. The lovely thing about Janet as a cousin is that she never criticised my academic achievements. Not until about a year ago, when for some reason my elder brother decided to show some of my old school reports to her. On this occasion, being 16 days older came into play yet again. That evening, I was taken to one side by Janet to be told that my efforts in certain subjects were clearly not good enough. Maybe Hazel Showell was her made-up name for me. It's fair to say Janet had a mixed musical taste growing up. She was into the Osmonds, especially Donny, that was her heartthrob. She also liked a bit of Queen, and even some Black Sabbath thrown in. After A-levels, it was time for university. It is often said that going to university is all about giving you life experience. Janet was no exception to this. Janet went to university to study French and classical civilization. The subsequent one dropped the classics and did pure French. It's fair to say that the 18-year-old that left Maidenhead to study at Sheffield University finished her degree a totally different woman. To say Janet went for all that Sheffield had to offer would be an understatement. She worked studiously at being hip and trendy, dressing fashionably and nightclubbing. She split up with her then boyfriend, Mark Pottle, and at this time swore that she never ever wanted to become a boring old French teacher. This was also the time when she started wearing a classic bright red lipstick, something that scarred my young nieces and nephews at their young and tender age. In Janet's first year at university, soon after I had passed my driving test, I arranged with Janet that I would come up with Moose and spend a weekend with her to see what university life was all about. I had gone down the apprenticeship route, so was attending Twickenham College one day a week I had a car, lived at home with my parents, and had a bit of money in my pocket. I had arranged to drive to Maidenhead and pick Moose up, and then drive up to Sheffield Uni to spend what I thought was going to be a quiet weekend with my cousins. We left Maidenhead with supplies that Janet had requested and an address of her student accommodation. Uncle Peter had drawn us a map of how to find it, as this was before the days of satellite navigation and mobile phones. We arrived at the correct student flat at the correct time to find a student outside. We asked if he knew of Janet, which he did. He let us into the flats and said that we hadn't seen her for a few days. But there was nothing strange about that. We made our way into the communal kitchen of Janet's flat to find it was piled with pots, pans and bags of rubbish. There were 3 students sitting there, and they said we were in the correct place, but Janet wasn't in her room and hadn't been seen for a couple of days. Needless to say, this wasn't the reception we had expected, but looking back, we shouldn't have been surprised. Amanda and I were both very naive to first-year university life then. I can remember asking the other students if they thought she was at a lecture. They just laughed and said no. One reassured us, saying, if Janet said she would be here, she will be at some point. In the meantime, do you want a drink? We decided we would have a cup of tea and a piece of cake that we had taken up for Janet. First job was to try and find a clean mug. Amanda and I set about washing up, which was no mean feat. Every pot, pan, mug, utensil had been used. After completing this and putting everything away, I took all the rubbish outside to the waste bin area. We finally sat down for our cup of tea and cake sometime later. I can clearly remember that one of the students sat with us and polished off about half the cake, when suddenly this vision of blonde hair, bright red lips bounced through the door and put her arms around us both and said how lovely it was that we had made the journey to visit her. No explanation as to where she had been, why she was late. She didn't even notice that a term's worth of washing up and rubbish had been removed from her flat. She quickly went through the box of goodies Auntie Valerie had sent up, scoffed down a piece of cake, and thanked me for the envelope that Uncle Peter had asked me to give her. Then she said, "Come on, let's go and party." First stop, Student Union Bar. It was quite apparent on entering the bar that Janet was very well known there. If it was liquid, Janet drank it. If you could light it, Janet would smoke it. The quite studious cousin from a middle-class, loving Maidenhead family that was a gifted musician and a fantastic sportswoman had finally been let loose to see what the world had to offer, and she wasn't wasting any time. Life was for living. By 11 o'clock that night, we had done 3 bars. We were in Mr. Kitt's bar, and Janet was heading for the nightclub. The night was still young in her eyes. Amanda and I picked up something to eat and proceeded to go back to Janet's accommodation. Amanda slept in Janet's bed because she wasn't going to be using it that night, and I dossed on the sofa. Later the next morning, Janet arrived back and wanted to show us the university, especially the Paternoster lift. I think we saw more of the university on that day than Janet had seen in her whole first year. On arriving back at Janet's accommodation, she took herself off to get some much-needed sleep and prepare for more of the same. By 8:30, we were back in the Students' Union Bar, and by 9:30 that evening, she was telling me to be ready in the morning at 9:45 because I had a football match to play in. Needless to say, by midnight, Amanda and I were finished, but Janet was just off for a couple more. We returned to the accommodation And it wasn't until 9:45 on the dot that Janet staggered back in and said, "Come on, football time." I had no shorts, so Janet just found some in the dryer that belonged to some of the other students. "These will do. You have a t-shirt and a pair of trainers." We then walked to the local park where loads of games of football were going on. Janet said, "Who do you want to play for?" "What standard are you?" Before I had time to answer, she had gone over to a couple of blokes she knew and told them I needed a game of football, and I was playing. Game over, time to go home. We said our goodbyes and then proceeded back to Maidenhead. I can remember arriving back and being very diplomatic with Auntie Valerie and saying I couldn't stop as I have work in the morning, but I'm sure Amanda will tell you all that we have been up to. The honest answer should have been I've driven 180 miles up there to help clean Janet's accommodation, drink too much and spend about 6 hours in her presence over 3 days and then drive back. One of her years at university was spent at Clermont-Ferrand in France. This was where she was dumped in at the deep end in a small town where no one spoke a word of English. No problem for our Janet. Needless to say, I didn't visit her again whilst at university. Instead, we used to meet up at Christmas at the family gatherings. These were always such fun. One never knew what new fashion Janet would be into that year and who she would be with. In her final year at university, she met the man who was to go on to be her husband, Peter, or Little Peter, as we named him. As Janet already had a Peter in her life. Little Peter remembers the first meeting he had with Janet. Apparently, it went like this. "You're the pretty boy from the library. Follow me." And he did. Interestingly, Little Peter also informed me that some 6 months later, Janet used Little Peter's notes from his linguistics course because she was going to have an exam the next day and hadn't gone to any of the lessons. And yes, you guessed it, she still passed the exam. I hope this has given you a little insight into our wonderful Janet, my older cousin. I would just like to end with something Marie said of Janet. She really was the cheeriest, sunniest, most uplifting friend, and all my memories of her are immensely joyful. I don't think I could say it better myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, choir. Would Lucy like to come forward to share a tribute?
I wasn't warned I'll have to follow such a wonderful start. Our friend Janet. 3 words, our friend Janet, carrying so much meaning and significance. She was my dearest friend, but she was also yours, and yours, and yours, and yours. A very great friend to a very great number of people, active in thought and word and deed. Janet was not only a friend, she was a loyal, unwavering daughter to her parents, the late Peter and Valerie Simpson. Janet was patient and calm and understanding, particularly when helping her mother move to Abbeyfield, Corbridge. This was when her mother was living with dementia in her later years. Janet was kind and attentive to her younger sister Amanda. Their shared love of music was palpable, and their care for each other when illness meant the going got tough was inspirational. I would like to pay tribute here to Amanda's long and day and night vigil at the hospice by Janet's side. Amanda has recognized this as having been a very great privilege, but those hours and minutes must have also been very difficult and challenging for her. Janet has been, since September 1989, a devoted, passionate, enthusiastic, and fun-loving wife to Peter. She was a most marvellous mother, not only to her own 4 children, but also to Alice from Rouen, who was Matilda's pen friend, and to Ariel, who is studying at Durham, and she has loved them both as her own. Indeed, Alice's father wrote recently from France to Peter, going as far to say that he thought Janet was mother to all children. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll begin at the beginning, as it's a very good place to start. Picture the scene, autumn term 1990, when our tutorial group of modern language graduates were beginning our postgraduate certificate education in secondary modern languages, Newcastle University. I spied Janet, rocking a pair of DM boots and wearing a bright lip, red lip. She looks fun, I thought, and so she was. We were both amused and amazed to have new surnames, having both had recent weddings. Janet had married Peter in Cookham, Berkshire, and I had married Paul in Craythorne. As well as sharing a great taste in men, Peter and Paul always got on very well. We later discovered we had a shared taste in wedding china, namely the Wedgwood set Osborne. When we needed extra pieces for dinner parties or fondue nights, we would bring extra plates to the table, with Janet always marking hers with red nail varnish on the bottom. Janet had the teacups and saucers, while I had the coffee cans. At our subsequent teaching practice placements, Madame Simpson Hornsey was wondering, why was there such an enormous sports hall at John Spence Community High School? Only to conclude at the end of 5 weeks that they just weren't that good at French. Janet taught at Prudhoe Community High School, later becoming head of sixth form there. Soon she was to join the modern language staff, including Hilary Douglas, among others, at Queen Elizabeth High School, Hexham. Hilary tells me she has very fond memories and photos of their first French exchange trips, beginning 2013. Staff at QE also paid tribute to Janet as being effusive, vivacious, and forever positive. Meanwhile, I was teaching as Madame Averley, or Bonjour Madame, as the pupils styled me at CM Comprehensive. With no regrets, after 2 years, I left for maternity leave, a staggering 11 weeks before our baby was born. Martha Joy arrived on the 1st of January 1994, which was a fittingly close date to Janet's New Year's Eve birthday, as we've been hearing. There was no doubt in our minds we would choose Janet and Peter to be godparents. Janet, though, was both shocked and astonished to be asked. "Don't make me godmother, darling. I've never even held a baby." Of course, she was a natural, never missing a birthday and always sending advent calendars and Easter eggs for a full 30 years. She would sign off cards to Martha, "Love the gods." A year later, in the Hornsey camp, Theo arrived. Paul and I were privileged and delighted to be asked to be godparents, along with David Loftus and Debbie. We remember the excitement of seeing Theo first. With his arms up around his head in Hexham Hospital, he almost filled his whole crib. We behaved shockingly, sitting on the bed, not allowed, leaving champagne debris around the bed, and even more unforgivable, leaving crisps in Janet's bed. Theo has inherited Janet's linguistic talents. He has an important role at an English language academy, teaching. He's enjoying his life in Valencia alongside his wonderful girlfriend Carmen, who is here today. Soon it was time to welcome Jocasta Rose. She was very fittingly named after the queen of paint effects, Jocasta Innes. You only have to see the painted cherries above the Arga at Sparty Lee to feel Janet's colourful stamp on the place. Janet has been constant to Jocasta, as has Peter. They are rightly proud of Jocasta's many achievements. Jocasta graduated from St. Peter's College, Oxford, in English literature. She then completed her MA in medieval literature from York. Always a keen baker, she's an absolute star, with her patience, finesse, and artistic steady hand producing many showstoppers. It was Jocasta who I commissioned to make a wonderful Harry Potter cake for Martha's 30th. Have you seen her Instagram? This girl can bake. The arrival of Jacob brought the tally to 3. By now, Janet was ahead of me by 1 month. We had already welcomed our daughter Alice in November. Shortly after Jacob's June arrival, saw the arrival of our Madeline in July. I remember Janet looking rather wistfully at the 2 babies. Same result, she sighed, thinking back to her groaning over the birthing ball while I had taken the epidural route for the 3rd time. Janet referred to their Jacob as being a boy in a bubble. However, I can confirm that he very clearly got much on the ball, given that he is now in his 5th year as a professional ballet dancer. When we saw Jacob dance recently with his touring Welsh troupe at the Gala Theatre, Durham, in his role as Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet, he absolutely commanded the stage with his scowling and swaggering and sword fighting. Jacob was quite spellbinding to watch, and he has subsequently played the lead role Romeo. We are delighted to have Chloe, his girlfriend, amongst us today. We spent many happy times with the Hornsey family. From our early fondue parties, we moved on to skiing holidays. Their 3 children and our 3, and the 3 children from the Mills family made up what became known as the Dream Team. We hit on the very winning formula of 2 ski teachers, one at the front and one bringing up the rear. By now, we were outnumbered by 6 children between us. Janet and I learned to talk very fast in very limited time. Even many years later, last summer, Honorary Mum Chris from National Childbirth Trust Days witnessed this in our garden when he had been chauffeuring Janet to her Freeman Hospital appointment. Chris could hardly believe that Janet and I could both speak and listen at the same time. We were so very different, but somehow we got each other. Going way back, Janet and Peter had met at Sheffield University. It was more or less love at first sight, Janet told me. Indeed, there was a lot of gazing into each other's eyes and a lot of vodkas and a lot of time spent in bed, not in the library. Peter recently said to me that Janet was rather a poor student, but she certainly seems to have become a very determined, energetic, imaginative, and creative teacher. This early passion was to rear its head again after Jacob was born. Even with 3 young children, Janet was mad keen to have another baby. My head is saying no, but my womb is saying yes, she explained, weeping into the baby grows. At that time, Peter was playing squash weekly with Paul. Oh no, we said, you can't have 4 children, you need a bigger car. Run faster, Paul counselled Peter to escape Janet's clutches. One day, though, Peter came clean. She caught me, he said. Matilda arrived in all her brilliance. As a baby, though, she was more trouble than the other 3 put together. How were they going to manage the skiing holiday? Matilda was far too young to come, so a plan was hatched to leave her with Janet's mum. And in all fairness, Amanda said, Janet's mum said, she'll miss you and it'll be very difficult. In fact, despite the efforts of Nanny Valerie and of Auntie Lucille, it was very challenging to persuade Matilda out of her nightie and into her clothes. She was missing her mother terribly. The result being that at what must have felt a very long week for Nanny Valerie, she met us at Newcastle Airport, thrusting pushchair and child at Janet. She's all yours, darling. The following year, it was determined that Matilda would come along, but be assigned to Bambi Club. I had very strong reservations. She won't understand anything, and she'll hate it. She'll be fine, darling, said Janet. She was not fine. Janet and Peter had to invest in Montessori nursery for attachment disorder, and the threat of, I'll send you to Bambi Club, became the stuff of legend. I'm pleased to say that Matilda has since recovered. She too is a brilliant linguist, speaking Korean and having great resilience. She has recently survived a year at the Premier University of Seoul in South Korea. She and Janet spent many hours bonding over BTS, I think it's a boy band, and Korean dramas, particularly during lockdown. Janet was generous, thoughtful, kind, always showing imaginative flair. She would decorate her children's foil wrap sandwiches with her finger, making smiley faces. She illustrated worksheets with quirky animals and sketches. She would write her Christmas cards in vibrant purple ink. Very much thinking of others before herself, she was keen to manage other people's reactions to her diagnosis, explain that she couldn't keep going with junior church. She did, though, keep going with singing at the choir here at St. Cuthbert's, Allendale, even as late as this Easter. Amanda told me she absolutely hated missing a choir rehearsal if she was not well enough to join you. When she went to St. Oswald's, she was anxious that the choir members knew where she was. For our visits, she seemed to draw on inner strength to make wonderful cheese scones, even though she was very poorly. When we saw her, or I spoke to her on the phone, she didn't like to talk about her illness. By the time we'd gone through all the children, time was up. Only once did she say, after a very painful pressing on her ocular nerve, "This is getting to me now." She sounded vexed when she was given a trial leprosy drug, which made her feel worse, not better. Mainly, though, if she wasn't up to talking, she would say, "Well, next week I'll be better." She was eternally grateful to her oncologist, Danielle, who would respond to texts any time of day or night. Janet also spoke highly of the lovely nurses who would bring her chemo to the wilds of Sparty Lee. She was also indebted to the valiant work put in by her Macmillan nurses. They would monitor her pain medication, giving advice and support to Janet if she was ever worried or uncertain about anything. Janet and I would meet as often as we were able, or I would put a parcel in the post. We had our favourite table at the legendary Corbridge Cafe, Tea and Tipple. Perhaps you know it. One Easter, we bumped into each other quite by chance at Corbridge Bookshop, and we sometimes would choose the same Oxfam Christmas card in a kind of ESP way. 4 years ago, we had a very memorable tea party for almost the whole family in our garden. In May 2022, we had a very special outdoor afternoon tea with Peter and Paul at Walwick Hall, near to where it had all begun in Humshoff. Such wonderful memories. In February this year, Peter, Janet and Jocasta travelled together to Valencia to visit Theo. She was well, said Peter, better than she'd been for ages, he said subsequently. One day, though, out of the blue, I got a characteristically cheerful text. Hi, darling. How are you? Are you in Gosforth? I'm in St Oswald's with my sister, getting some rest and super care. Love, Jay. And then, in her own inimitable fashion, I'll give you Amanda's number. She's my social secretary. Tee-hee. That was Saturday the 11th of May. Paul, Martha and I visited Janet that Tuesday afternoon. She bravely put on the performance of a lifetime, urging Martha to buy cake forks for her and Patrick's August wedding. Sometime later, we went on pilgrimage to Corbridge, as instructed, to carry out Janet's wishes. According to Janet's great friend, Katie Oliver, over those 13 or so days in the hospice, Janet apologised multiple times for being a nuisance. She was still thinking of others, as her mother Valerie had done, said Amanda. Both Natalie of NCT and this great friend Katie reminisced that she called everybody darling or sweet pea. Always keen on a cuppa, she was an invaluable listening ear to Katie, who told me she remembered that Janet had once sent her a Snoopy cartoon saying, "Stay close to people who feel like sunshine." Janet was sunshine and she was colour. We were all lucky to have known her and to have loved her. Let me finish now with Janet having the last word as she signed our Northumberland Hemel visitors book after a very fun night, late night sleepover. We were almost back full circle, just the four of us. Rubbish, she wrote. All we did was talk, drink, eat delicious pizzas, and didn't go to bed. Never again. Tee-hee. All our love, Janet and Peter.
Will you please stand if you're able as we join in singing our hymn together, For the Beauty of the Earth. Would you please be seated, and I'd like to invite up Theo, who will share a tribute on behalf of the family.
I'd like to start by describing a particular trip that we would make as a family down to Maidenhead to visit our dear Nanny Valerie, as well as our wonderful family down south. Whether it was an extended summer holiday on Alderbury Road, or part of a brief pit stop on our way down to France or over to Cornwall, this trip always gave us kids a great deal of excitement. There were the delights of visiting Beaconscott Model Village, watching the cricket in the neighbouring field when the sun was out, and of course, making our way through the impressive collection of Nanny's Disney VHS tapes when the weather wasn't so kind. However, come rain or shine, there was one particular activity we would look forward to each and every time we visited. That was to explore the vast collection of photo albums that Nanny had, an expansive archive maintained thanks to the photos taken by her, by Dada, and of course our dear Uncle Fred. Through literally hundreds of albums, thousands of photos, we were given the thrilling opportunity of exploring little snapshots of our childhoods, at home, on holiday, in school plays and concerts, with friends and family. I should point out that you'll be able to see some of these photos in the village hall after the service. Although a picture is worth 1,000 words, I know that everybody who has shared such memories with us and our mum, and who have stood by her and our family over the last few months and years, those who have come to join us today, and those who are unfortunately not able to make it, will all have so much more than just a momentary snapshot, a photograph of our mum. Rather, it is the light of her warmth, her creativity, her patience, and her endless optimism in the face of whatever came that she will be in fact remembered for. Growing up in a big family obviously came with the guarantee that we were rarely bored, for obvious reasons. A quiet, private space was hard to find at home, and getting your voice heard was just as difficult. However, above all, it was the passion and enthusiasm that our parents, our mum and dad, had for so many different things in life that made sure this guarantee held true. To name a few of these, my mum had a passion for dance and sport. My siblings and I were all encouraged by her to be part of Mrs. Laurie's ballet school in Hexham throughout our childhood and adolescent years. This obviously harboured mixed success, with my brother performing professionally to this day, and me, by contrast, being somewhat harshly likened to a gorilla in a leotard. Mrs. Laurie was a wonderful combination of very caring and firm. But it was above all my mum's love of being active and creative that drove us to dance and to play sport, regardless of whatever wild animal we might be compared to. Her love of the creative and visual arts inspired us, and she celebrated the many ways we expressed ourselves creatively in our own ways. She recognized, for example, my passion for performing on stage. She commemorated this when she used decoupage to decorate an old bookshelf, hand-painting it in a vibrant red and royal blue, and adorning it with cutouts of Shakespeare's sonnets and monologues. This shelf came with me to university, and it now sits alongside my bed at home. As I'm sure a lot of you know, the rest of our house likewise hosts a wealth of decoupaged furniture, decorative painting, extravagant wallpaper colours with intricate stencils, all lovingly designed and crafted by our mum. As an avid linguist, she had a passion for language and for the different countries and cultures it can lead you to. It would become a regular practice on our family trips to France that my mum's holidays would not officially begin until she came into the kitchen on the second or third day, declaring to the room that she just dreamt in French, whatever that meant, and that her official holiday could now finally begin. She told me very recently about the immense pride she had for each of us children, taking the leap and leaving the nest at some point or another, to experience and celebrate our own independence beyond the UK. She was thrilled at the prospects of my moving to Spain, of Jacob travelling all over Europe and beyond to dance to audiences which in fact include our current reigning monarch, and of my sisters Jocasta and Matilda, going as far as Qatar and South Korea to study and work. Of course, this encouragement to experience the world for ourselves always came with the promise that our coming home meal, which varied with each of us, would be ready for us when we inevitably came back home. I should point out that in my case it was her delicious cottage pie. My mum had a passion for her own work in education, for teaching adults and young people. It has given us a great deal of joy to hear from the ex-colleagues and pupils who have come forward and emphasised how much she cared for them inside and outside the classroom, how much of her own endless, active creativity she brought to her lessons. With pride, she'd show me her French worksheets, which she'd not only gone to great lengths to create herself, but also illustrated with her own artistic style, with many vivid colours and elaborate hand-drawn images of animals. I'd like to also thank Claudia Rankin aside for having designed the wonderful invitations to this memorial, and how much Claudia truly channeled our mum's own love of colour and imagery. For many, the idea of their mum teaching in the same school as them would be a bit of a nightmare. However, during my time at Queen Elizabeth's High School, it always gave me great joy to see her in her element, and the way the teachers, the staff, and pupils responded to her in the corridors. I observed the positive, enthusiastic presence she had in the languages department. And the care that she had for her students went beyond the school walls. I remember every year coming back home from school one day in June to find, to our surprise, a living room full of sixth form students having tea and cake. This annual celebration, hosted by my mum, commemorated the end of their French A-levels, and this brought her a great deal of happiness to share this achievement with her students. There was also her passion for music, for singing in particular. She never hesitated in saying how much she loved singing in choirs alongside the four of us. Coming home for Christmas, we would always expect our mum to have signed us up last minute to take part in the many carol services in Hexham with the high school choir and in Allendale with the wonderful church choir here today. Both of my parents raised us with music being a constant presence in our lives. There was a recent investigation into some of our desert island discs, which showed how much our parents were and still are an integral part of our love of music, from the likes of The Cure, New Order, Counting Crows and David Gray, to Green Day, My Chemical Romance and Linkin Park. We actually went to see Linkin Park live as a family, and I remember vividly my mum screaming the lyrics into my ear whilst pogoing off my shoulders. My parents have always shared a love for hiking and the outdoors. Our holidays to the Lake District, which will always hold a very special place in our hearts. It was there, on the windy tops of the Eskdale Fells, that my mum felt happiest, as we shared sandwiches and satsumas, perused the Wainwright walking book, before trudging down to the Ratty steam train for an ice cream. The noisy, cramped, cosy Brandtrake cottage filled with us and the rest of our wonderful Hornsey family, invariably brought my mum some of her fondest memories. For anybody, it wouldn't take long after meeting my mum for the first time to in some way feel at ease, heard, and loved, to recognize her warmth and her generosity, her ability to enter a room, to read it, and to emanate a feeling of comfort and positivity is a quality that is not always easy to learn or to find in others, and yet for her it was so natural. She always had time for a friend and prioritized their time shared over a cup of tea and a piece of Jojo's cake above all else. This wonderful aspect of her character, of the endless time she had for the people that she loved, was a constant everyday presence in our lives. Indeed, it was a regular occurrence for my mum and one or two kids, to run into a friend on the street and for her to then spend the next 30 minutes to an hour standing there and catching up, whatever the rush. In fact, it got to the point that I had to make her promise to keep her socializing time to a mere 5 minutes per person whenever we'd walk into Waitrose, knowing that if I didn't, our quick nip to the shops would become something a lot more lengthy. With a smile, she would reluctantly agree and then instantly bump into a friend as we grabbed a trolley. She flourished when the house was full of family and friends. It was almost as if the noise, the energy, the raucous laughter and arguing of a mere 6 people around the kitchen table was sometimes not quite enough for her. She relished the opportunity to welcome visitors under our roof, under her wing. Some of our fondest memories of playing in the garden at Bishopfield, dipping our feet into the sea of Cornwall's Ready Money Cove, and dodging the marshes on top of Muncaster Fell in the Lake District, were all shared with our dear au pair at the time, Mariana, who has forever been a lifelong friend to us, alongside her husband Dury and their wonderful family. Our honorary sisters, the fabulous Ariel and Elise, were quickly considered by my mum to be welcome additions to her clan. Once again, having a mere 4 of us was at times not quite sufficient enough for her. They have always had a home with the Hornseys, and they always will do. At this point, it would be foolish not to mention the many parties our mum took pride in hosting, parties which could only be described as legendary. There were the Halloween gatherings with our closest family friends, bringing together extravagant costumes and epic party games. There were the many birthday parties which would feature magicians, DJ sets in our living room, and prom nights, to name a few. There were also her Christmas at-home coffee mornings, welcoming friends, family, and all who lived nearby to share a mince pie and 1 or 2 glasses of mulled wine as Christmas approached. A final passion of hers that I would like to mention is for her family, for my dad and for us children. As we've grown up through the years, encountering challenges and obstacles, discoveries and achievements, our parents have continued to raise us with nothing but a loving and unconditional support and an enthusiasm for the directions we're heading. my mum never stopped openly cherishing moments with the family all together, and likewise with each of us 4 children individually. She recognized each of our independent strengths, our vulnerabilities and passions, and she celebrated our growth with her boundless optimism. Alongside my dad, she raised us children to support one another, to listen and to care. One phrase in particular that my parents have always brought us up with is care, share, be fair. And as a result, it has inevitably found its way into all of our lives. In my case, I could feel my mum beaming down the phone when, having called her from Spain, I'd let her know that I just managed to get my class of 5-year-old Spanish children to recite the phrase whilst handing out crayons. I should also say the phrase makes an appearance with my partner Carmen and I when we try to share a bag of scampi fries. They're very small bags, so you can imagine the patience required. One thing that these last few months have shown us as a family is just how many wonderful bonds of love and friendship exist around us, bonds that we, alongside our mum, have always cherished. On behalf of our family, of our mum, I want to give our sincerest thank you and love to you all for your presence throughout our mum's life. Thank you to Kevin and Lucy for honouring and celebrating her years today with your lovely words. We're so immensely grateful for the support provided more recently to Danielle, the doctors, and the Macmillan charity nurses whose incredible work has made us feel supported and optimistic about the next step. Thank you to those who stood by with us on those final weeks and days and who have continued to stand alongside us in the months that have followed. Thank you to the friends and communities that have always embraced my mum and our family with open arms, the people of Sparty-Lee, Allendale, Northumberland and beyond. There is no doubt in my mind that she's somewhere smiling down on all of us. I want to finish by going back to Maidenhead, or rather leaving it. Since our nanny moved out of Alderbury Road back in 2014 to come and join us in the north, we have since made a special place at home for her archive of photo albums. Although we may not continue the ritual of diving into them quite so religiously as we did on our childhood trips down south, it still brings us joy to take an album off the shelf and step into a fond and familiar part of our past lives, one in which my mum was forever present, forever glowing. My siblings and I share a genuine love of the childhoods our parents built for us, and an endless gratitude for their support as we've learned to embrace and celebrate the journey moving forwards. The memories we share of our mum revealed her love of celebrating life, its small, insignificant details, its many ups and downs, challenges and rewards. For us and for many others, she will be remembered as living proof that the more good and optimism you put into the world, the greater the happiness you build for yourself and share with the people around you. Thank you, Mum, for this invaluable gift.
Thank you, Theo, Kevin, and Lucy for helping us to celebrate Janet's life with such loving and colourful tributes. Janet said she always wanted a celebration, and so at this time we take comfort in all things that were good in Janet's life. We give thanks for the memories that we share and treasure. Janet gave so much to this church and community, so much grace, joy, and kindness. She lit the room up, as we heard. And when she sang in the choir with Amanda, Jocasta, and Ariel at our Christmas Carol concert, it was just stunning. It's a memory I will treasure. The veil thinned for a while, and we were in a heavenly place. Thank you, June, and the choir community that became home to Janet, and for lighting up our lives with such wonderful, uplifting music. Where love is, God is. God is here with us now. God is all around us, wherever we are. And God holds our loved ones close, enfolding them in his love. And so Janet is still with us in more than just memory. Just as love never ends, we can be sure that now Janet is safely in God's care. Now, throughout life we face times of heartache, loss and grief, but we do not face them alone. We face them together in community. And one of the ways we can honour and celebrate the lives of loved ones who have gone before us is by meeting each new day as a blessing, each day and each moment as a gift, taking inspiration from the way Janet lived her life. Janet's family would like to say a big thank you for all the love and support they've received. Would like me to mention Anne, who was a really special friend of the family. Anne absolutely loved Janet and misses her dearly. As Janet's spirit lives on in this community, in family and friends, we each carry a spark of Janet's light with us. And having been touched by Janet's love, we give thanks to God for Janet's faith, her positivity and grace, a light of love and hope that we now carry with us. Our loved ones have been set free, borne up on the wings of God's love. And as we commit our grief to God, let us give thanks for the gift of Janet, safe in the knowledge she is now in perfect peace, forever safe in God's keeping. In a minute of silence, we each recall what Janet has meant to us. Our earthly life is short. We blossom like a flower and then we wither. We slip away like a shadow and do not stay. Loving God, our truth and light, we give you thanks for Janet, for the grace and blessing she received from you, for all that was good in her life, for the memories we treasure today. As we recall Janet's life and cherish her memory, we give thanks that in bearing your image, she has brought light to our lives. And we gather today to honour Janet and say thank you for her life. Most merciful God, whose wisdom is beyond our understanding, we ask that you surround Peter, Amanda, Theo, Jocasta, Jacob, Matilda, Ariel, family and friends, and all who mourn with your love, that they may not be overwhelmed by their loss, but have confidence in your love and strength to meet the days to come. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Merciful Father, you turn the darkness of death into the dawn of new life. In our loss, O God, we seek your presence. In our uncertainty, your love. You are nearer to us than we know. Gracious God, we thank you for Janet, the years we shared with her, the good we saw in her, the love we received from her. Now give us strength and courage to leave Janet in your care. And as Jesus taught us, let us pray together, aloud or silently in our hearts, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. O God of mercy and forgiveness, Grant that death may be for Janet a gateway into new life. Carry her safely home and raise her up to enjoy your company forever. And we ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died to destroy our death, rose to restore our life, and who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. May the heavenly host sustain Janet, the company of heaven enfold her. In communion with all the faithful, may Janet dwell in peace. Grant to Janet eternal life, O God, and let perpetual light shine upon her. As we give thanks for the blessings of Janet in our life, we join with the choir in singing our next anthem, In the Lord I'll Be Ever Thankful. Carrie's going to come and read a poem for us.
This poem was chosen by a friend of Janet's, Sue Mayans. If I Should Go by Joyce Grenfell. If I should go before the rest of you, break not a flower, nor inscribe a stone, nor, when I'm gone, speak in a Sunday voice, but be the usual selves that I have known. Weep if you must, parting is hell, but life goes on, so sing as well.
Thank you, Carrie. Before we join in singing our final hymn, a big thank you to June and the choir, Norma for the beautiful flower displays, the bell ringers, Shirley and the Warden team for helping us celebrate Janet's life here before God today. All are welcome to join family and friends at the village hall after the service. There is a collection plate at the back of church, donations going to St Cuthbert's Church and Macmillan Cancer Support. Will you please stand if you're able as we join in singing Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise.